4 seasons of excavation at Horvat Kur in the Lower Galilee have exposed the remains of a broad-house basilical synagogue from the Byzantine period. The excavations have been sponsored by Leiden University in the Netherlands, the University of Bern in Switzerland, the University of Helsinki in Finland, and Wofford College in the USA. Horvat Kur is located in the hills to the west of Tel Kinroot, on a fertile plain atop a broad plateau above Wadi Amud. Surveys and maps, including an 1889 map by Gottlieb Schumacher, as well as conversations with regional experts, suggested that the site was promising for excavation. An initial survey in 2007 confirmed the presence of houses and terraces, as well as a large rectangular building. Surface sherds were concentrated in the Hellenistic through Byzantine periods, but samples from both earlier and later periods were found as well. Test trenches were excavated in 2008, and a study season was carried out in 2009, and on this basis a strategy for 4 seasons of excavation, 2010 through 2013, was developed. That excavation strategy sought to answer 3 questions. 1. How did an average rural Galilean settlement from the Hellenistic to Byzantine period function? 2. How was that average rural Galilean settlement interrelated with human and natural transformations of the landscape? And 3. How was that settlement related to the wider context of the ancient Mediterranean world? Accordingly, in the first season, 2 excavation areas were opened. Area A, the rectangular public building, and Area C, a domestic area. The finds in Area A indicated that the rectangular public building had most likely been a synagogue. A monumental threshold stone was uncovered, along with neatly worked basalt stone walls associated with an interior bench. In Area C, parts of 2 courtyard houses were found, separated by a narrow alley. Of particular importance in this area was the concentration of pottery in the late Roman and Byzantine periods. As we will see, ceramics and coins from the synagogue were also concentrated in these periods, evidence which strongly suggests that the principal occupation on the site was late Roman and Byzantine. After the 2010 season, the decision was made to focus the efforts of subsequent seasons on the synagogue in Area A. It is noteworthy that in each of these seasons, on-site registration and data recording was done through the use of mobile digital electronic devices, including the Apple iPad, a Leica Total Station, and custom-tailored FileMaker Pro software. The synagogue at Horvat Kur sits at the edge of a hill, at the northeastern limit of human construction on the site. To the north and east of the building, the topography slopes steadily downward, and on these slopes there's evidence of ancient agricultural activity, an oil press, for example. The building itself measures 11 meters by 16.5 meters and is constructed of basalt blocks set in 2 rows, an outer row of larger stones, with outer faces neatly worked, and an inner row of smaller stones, not all of which were neatly hewn. Many of the stones in this inner row are plastered on their interior face. There were 2 entrances to the building, a double-leaf door in the center of the western wall, which, in view of the colonnaded portico on that side of the building, likely served as the main entrance, and a single-leaf entrance on the south wall. This southern entrance is not centered on the wall, but is offset several meters to the west, probably because of an ornate elevated platform at the center of the southern wall on the inside. The location of this platform, or bima, indicates that ritual activity in the synagogue was oriented toward Jerusalem. A low bench of basalt stones, some of which were plastered, runs along the interior walls, interrupted only by the bima in the center of the southern wall. 2 rows of columns run north-south on either side of the bima. Thus, the plan of the building is basilical, and the long axis of the building runs east-west, so that the synagogue has the layout of a broad house. The fill above the floors in the synagogue was a thick layer of destruction debris, building stones and chunks of plaster, in a matrix of loose medium brown soil. But this fill was not stratified, a fact which was clearly evident in the ceramics. The pottery is predominantly late Roman and Byzantine, but occasional sherds of medieval glazed ware persist even in loci well below the topsoil. The ceramic evidence indicates that the destruction debris has been disrupted by medieval stone robbing, probably by crusaders who were active in nearby Tiberias. The fill as we found it thus reflects not the destruction of the synagogue by the earthquake of 749, but rather what was left of that destruction debris after it had been plundered by the crusaders. The presence of Ottoman clay pipes and some very late pottery in the topsoil layer indicates that visitors have continued to stop by the site in more recent periods as well. The Horvat Kur synagogue underwent a number of changes and repairs over the course of its use. At present, it is our judgment that these changes comprise two phases. We think the first phase of the synagogue began sometime in the early 5th century CE. This first phase included the basilical structure in broad house layout with columns, the bima, a multicolored mosaic floor in the nave, and a bench around the exterior wall. The adjacent room on the north side also belongs to this first phase. At some point in the late 6th century, the synagogue underwent major repairs, especially on its eastern side, where the architecture was less stable, primarily because, as previously mentioned, the plateau slopes downward away from the building to the north and east. In this second phase, the eastern half of the north wall was rebuilt, although not on exactly the same line as the earlier wall. The orientation of the rebuilt wall runs slightly to the southeast of the earlier wall. The reconstruction of this north wall closed off the adjacent room, which was no longer used. The portico was added to the western side of the building, and the multicolored mosaic in the nave was removed. Indeed, both the multicolored mosaic floor and a coin deposit, which had been laid in beneath it, were dug up and dumped into the fill of the portico. A plain gray plaster floor was installed in the nave and the aisles. Finally, the spaces between the interior columns of the building were filled in with stones of various shapes and sizes. As we will see, some of these stones were ornamented. The installation of these stones produced an arrangement which evokes the impression of a stylobate, even though none of the new stones actually supported a column. Perhaps they may even have served as benches. Coins found beneath two of these stones, including some which had been deposited in a lead vessel, establish a terminus postquem for the installation in the late 6th century CE. The second phase of the synagogue remained in use until 749, when the entire building was destroyed by an earthquake. Speaking of mosaic floors, which are always of interest to archaeologists of Roman and Byzantine Palestine, multicolored tesserae are very frequent in the fill at Horvat Kur, both in the portico and inside the synagogue. To this point, however, we have found only one intact area of mosaic floor in situ. Measuring 205 by 110 centimeters, it is located immediately to the east of the bima. The tesserae are all white, and there are no inscriptions. At its southern end, this floor disappears beneath a fallen column, which was in reuse as a bench on the southern wall. The mosaic floor thus predates the gray plaster floor found in other areas of the interior of the synagogue. As such, it lends support to our judgment that an earlier mosaic was replaced by a gray plaster floor. The excavation of the Horvat Kur synagogue has produced a number of significant finds, including, first, a seat of Moses. A worked limestone block was found in situ atop the bench inside the synagogue, immediately to the west of the entrance on the southern wall. The block had been worked into the form of a seat, with a rim and armrests, and was plastered into place atop the bench. 2 basalt stepping stones were laid side by side directly in front of it, providing for ease of movement into and out of the seat. The location and prominence of this seat suggests that it was used by the leader of the congregation during synagogue gatherings. While similar specimens have been found in other contexts, Chorazin, for example, and one has been found in situ at En-Gedi, to our knowledge, the Horvat Kur seat is the first such specimen ever found in situ in northern Israel. Second, the Horvat Kur stone. One of the ornamented stones in the eastern stylobate wall turned out to be a low basalt stone table. Weighing about 350 kilograms, it is hewn from a single block of basalt rock. It measures 70 centimeters wide, 68 centimeters deep, and 35 centimeters high, with feet under 3 of its 4 corners. The surface of the block is rough, except for the central area of the decoration on top, which has been carefully smoothed. The stone is decorated with figurative elements on one side, which we call the show side, and with geometric patterns on the other 3 sides and the top. The bottom is undecorated. The stone is slightly damaged in 3 places: on the upper right corner of the show side, in the upper right corner of the back side, and at the rear left corner, where the foot is missing. All breaks and scratches are ancient. The top of the stone features 3 concentric rectangles, each cut into the surface at increasing depth, so that the center rectangle is the deepest. The surface of this innermost rectangle is the only area on the stone which has been smoothed. The rest of the top is plain and undecorated. The show side of the stone features several figurative representations, including candelabra and vessels for liquids, specifically a vase, 2 jugs, and a ladle or simpulum. Comprehensive interpretation of this iconography would far exceed the limits of this preliminary report today. In this report, however, we wish to emphasize that the stone was found in secondary reuse in something like a stylobate wall from the 2nd phase of the synagogue. Responsible interpretation of this very interesting artifact is thus significantly hampered by the total absence of an archaeological context for its original use. A full report on the stone is forthcoming. The bima. Perhaps the most striking feature in the interior of the synagogue is a nearly square structure, approximately 2.4 meters on each side, abutting the southern wall at its center point. In our judgment, this structure was a bima, a platform which supported a chest or ark holding Torah scrolls. Unlike the rest of the synagogue, the bima is not made of basalt, but of carefully dressed, high-quality limestone. A number of decorative fragments were found in the fill in and around the bima, including pieces from reliefs of a lion and a rosette, along with architectural fragments from columns and an arch. A large threshold stone on the east side of the bima shows that the space beneath the platform was used for some kind of storage. Inside this storage area, we found 2 layers of stone pavement, along with coins and a bronze oil lamp from the Roman period. The bima appears to have been the target of significant medieval stone robbing, so unfortunately, all of its original features cannot be reconstructed. But in our judgment, it shares a number of important characteristics with the reconstructed bima at al-Qanatir. Fourth, the coin deposit. As I've already mentioned, the fill beneath the beaten earth surface in the portico included the discarded remains of a multicolored mosaic, as well as a coin deposit of over 1,000 coins. The coins fall into 2 chronological clusters, a very large cluster from the early 5th century CE and a smaller cluster from the late 6th century CE. In our view, the earlier cluster was associated with the construction of the mosaic floor in the nave during the first phase. This cluster can supply a terminus post quem for the first phase of the synagogue in the early 5th century. The later cluster, in our view, was associated with the construction of the portico and its beaten earth surface. It thus supplies a terminus post quem for the second phase of the synagogue in the late 6th century. We base this interpretation upon careful observation of the stratigraphy in the fill under the beaten earth surface in the portico. Specifically, that stratigraphy included, in descending order, 1. The beaten earth surface of plaster and cobblestones, 2. A layer of soft, brown soil with cobbles, some tesserae, and 90% of the coins, 3. A layer containing especially many tesserae, and 4. A thin layer of brownish-gray soil just above the terra rossa. In our view, this stratigraphy has been inverted. When the mosaic floor and the coin layer beneath it were removed from the nave and dumped into the fill in the portico, the relationship between the floor and the coin deposit was reversed. The coins which had been located beneath the mosaic in the nave were now resting atop the remains of that mosaic in the portico. At that point, the later cluster of coins was laid in, and the beaten earth floor was put on top. 5th, a cistern. A cistern was located just outside the synagogue to the north. A test trench in the sediment at the bottom of this cistern produced 28 intact vessels, cooking pots and water jars, from the late Roman and early Byzantine periods. Not all of these vessels have been studied yet, but those which have are all examples of late Kfar Hanania wares between the early 4th and early 5th centuries CE. A dense sequence of pollen samples was also collected from this sediment. Preliminary analysis of these samples indicates that agricultural activity in the area was directed toward pasturage rather than crop production. Finally, our ceramicist has offered a preliminary analysis of the pottery from the 2010 and 2012 seasons of excavation in the fill of the synagogue. Some of the types represented in our assemblage were manufactured as far away as Western Turkey and Tunisia. Yet the preponderance of the pottery proves to be of regional North Palestinian provenance. For its pottery supply, Horvat Kur relied predominantly on regional and above all inland exchange patterns. During an upcoming study season in 2014, our staff will convene at the site to write a final report on the synagogue. In upcoming seasons, we plan to return to the domestic structures in Area A. For now, however, we can say that the Horvat Kur synagogue provides a useful example of Byzantine synagogue construction, decoration, and use in the setting of a lower Galilean village of relatively modest economic circumstances.